Hello, everyone. Welcome to a historical evening, an evening of trivia prizes and Q&A with the authors of History Through Fiction. My name is Colin Mustful. I am the founder and editor of History Through Fiction, and I'm so glad to have all of you here for this really fun event. And it's actually really nice for all of us to get together. We don't often see each other, even though it is over Zoom, so that's really fun for us as well. Just a couple things before I get things started. So I'm going to start with a rapid fire questions for each one of our panelists, and they're going to have about 60 seconds to answer those questions. Then I am going to draw questions that you pre-submitted, that the audience pre-submitted, and I'm actually going to, I printed them off and I will pull them out of a bag. So that's how the questions will be chosen, and our panelists will answer those questions. In between some of these questions, I will be asking trivia questions, and the first person to answer the trivia question correctly in the chat gets their name added to the drawing at the end, because I'm drawing prizes at the end. So those that pre-submitted questions, you're included in the prize drawing, and those who are first to answer our trivia questions correctly also get added to that prize drawing. So it should be a great time. I'm so glad all of you could be here, and I'm really looking forward to it. So let me introduce our panelists. We have Jillian Forsberg. She is the author of The Rhino Keeper, which we haven't set a release date yet. It'll be coming out in less than a year, we'll say that, or about a year. We have Robin Henry. She is the founder of Readerly.net, and she is a certified book coach, and she works for us on a freelance basis, and she does an amazing job. We have Eric Weintraub. He is the author of South of Sephiroth, which comes out on February 20th of this year. We have Nancy Burkhalter, and she is the author of The Education of Delhomme, and that came out in 2020, I believe, during the height of the pandemic. But we still did the best we could with that, and it was we're really proud of her novel. We have Alina Adams. She is the author of countless books. I won't try to repeat them all, but then the one she published with History Through Fiction is My Mother's Secret. And then we have Patricia Bernstein, and she's the author of A Noble Cunning, and that came out in March of last year. For those that are attending, go ahead and say hello in the chat. Just let us know where you're joining us from, and just say hello. Okay, now I'm going to jump into those rapid fire questions. So the first question I have is for Jillian. Jillian, what inspires you to write about 18th century history?
I am such a romantic, and I'm going to give myself away. I love everything fancy and frilly. I love royals. I love big costumes. I love art. Anything that's over the top has always really appealed to me. And when I think about the most exciting times in fashion and art history, my mind always goes to the 1700s. I can't seem to escape it, and I'll even creep a little bit into the early 1800s, and I don't want to go. And I'll go back a little bit and I'm like, no, I think I'll just go back to, oh, the early French Revolution and the time of Marie Antoinette. Those things are the most beautiful and interesting to me. And I also think it's great to think about that the world was really opening to people at that time where people could read and write, and the things that came out of that century from Voltaire and different writers and artists that I know and love even 300 years later. It's just always appealed to me, and I don't think that I can ever truly leave it behind. If I were born in another century, it would have been that one.
Thank you, Jillian. Let's go to Robin. Robin, you are a certified book coach. What is a book coach, and how did you become one?
Okay, so I'm fortunate that you gave me a little bit of advance notice because this is a hard question to answer, but think of it this way. A book coach is kind of like a personal trainer for writers. We provide scaffolding, we provide accountability and feedback to help you write faster and finish and do a better job with your early drafts so that there is hopefully less revision, although there will always be some revision. Basically, we're there to help you on the journey so that writing is less lonely and also so that you can get to your goals for a lot of people that can be really helpful. And some people fill this role through like writers groups and stuff, but a book coach has some professional training. And I decided to do that because as a librarian, in my previous professional life, I was a librarian. And I read a lot of books, and many of them were so good, but many of them were not so good. And I wanted to be in the job that would help writers make really good books because I love them so much. And so that's why I'm there.
Thanks, Robin. Next, I want to go to Alina. Alina, I have heard you do so many interviews, and I was trying to think of a question that maybe you hadn't been asked before. So, my question for you is, what do your stories teach you about yourself?
Ooh, that is a deep question. Well, as you mentioned, I've written a lot of books, but the most recent one that I've done for History Through Fiction is My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region. And the book that came before that, The Nesting Dolls, were both set in the Soviet Union. So one of the questions that I very frequently get is how much of your life influenced these stories? And I always say, you know how at the beginning it says no characters or events in this book are related to anyone living or dead? Well, that's my story and I'm sticking with it. But as I go through these books, my husband and my children are finding things in the book. They go, didn't that happen to you? I'm like, oh, yeah, it did. Or things like, isn't that somehow like part of a story that you told? Oh, well, now that you mention it. So my kids are 24, 20, and my daughter's about to turn 17. And of their generation, one of their favorite words is generational trauma. They love generational trauma. They love talking about generational trauma. So periodically, they'll read something in the book, and when they say it happened to you, they'll go, oh, that's generational trauma. And I'll go, no, that's life. But apparently, one of the things that I have learned courtesy of my children and the books that I've written is apparently maybe I have a little bit more trauma, but in my world, that's just life, and that's how you deal.
Thank you, Alina. Next, let's go to Nancy. Nancy, you wrote a book from the perspective of Frédéric Chopin's piano tuner, which I just think is really unique. So how did you come up with that idea?
Well, I am a piano tuner. And after I graduated from college with a degree in linguistics and other things, I didn't know what to do. So my then boyfriend said, oh, I know. Why don't you become a piano tuner? And okay, so I did. And it was really took me away from all the other kinds of studying that I had done, which is books, and this was hands-on. But while I was an apprentice, I was also listening to classical music, which I have done and also play. But I thought I was so enamored of Chopin, and I thought, the old warhorse question that all writers go to is what if? And I thought, well, Chopin was not exactly a strapping young man. He was sick most of his life. And and it takes a lot of effort and strength to become a piano tuner and to do it. So I thought, what if he had a piano tuner? He must have. And so I invented that and carried that idea through. Um, and I even found out the name of his piano tuner, which was really fun. But so that's how I arrived at that.
Well, it worked and it got you a publishing contract.
Yes, it really did.
Well, next let's go to Eric. Eric, I've been interviewing you quite a few times because your book is coming out very soon and you were on a podcast again today. So I tried to get a little creative with my question for you. Tell us about the first story you remember writing.
I love this question because I don't think anyone's ever asked me before, but actually it was a sports short story, and I have not written sports since then. And I was about, I want to say 13 years old when I wrote it, and it was about a middle schooler who really wanted to be a great basketball player. And, he wanted to go to college on a basketball scholarship. He wanted to go to the NBA, but the only problem was that no matter how much he practiced, he could never get good at basketball. He couldn't even make a single shot. And then about halfway through the story, he meets a stranger who grants him magical powers, and he suddenly becomes amazing at basketball. But that's short-lived because he accidentally gets hit on the head, and that's the end of it. Now, not really a character story at best, I would say, but this was really the primordial ooze of my writing career, and you have to start somewhere. It doesn't even really have, telling it now doesn't even really have a great beginning, middle, end, but it doesn't start with a 300-page novel. It starts with a short story, just working from there and keeping it up.
Yeah, that's great. Patricia, finally, let's go to you. You came to fiction as a nonfiction author. Talk about what do you enjoy about writing fiction versus what do you enjoy about writing nonfiction?
Well, I didn't ever think I was going to write fiction. And then we went to Scotland and we heard this amazing story that was new to me about a persecuted Catholic noblewoman who rescued her husband from the Tower of London the night before his scheduled execution, a feat which no one ever accomplished before or after. And I thought, wow, how come I've never heard this before? And it seems so clearly to lend itself to some kind of dramatization because one of her descendants had already done a very comprehensive biography of her. And so I decided to try it. And the first things I found out were if you're writing fiction instead of nonfiction, no footnotes. You can forget about footnotes completely, which is fabulous. And you can change anything you want, which was also very exciting to me. But I may go back to nonfiction as well because the books I've written that are nonfiction are pretty serious topics. They have their own intrinsic drama. I don't think they need to be dramatized anymore. And my purpose would be to write, what they call narrative nonfiction and make it as interesting as if you were reading a novel.
Thanks, Patricia. And I actually, now that you mention it, I think there is a question or two about footnotes, so maybe we will get to that later in the program. But now I'm going to ask a question that was submitted by our audience. So I'm just going to pull one out of this bag. And the question is from Brock. And it is, what are the three most significant reasons for writing historical fiction? So who wants to give a shot at that one? What is it? Go ahead, Alina.
Well, I'll give one and then everyone can jump on. I think writing historical fiction is the easiest genre in the world to write in because you don't have to make up what happened. Things have already happened. All you have to do is go into the world, find out what happened, where it happened, when it happened, and then you create a character who reacts to what happened. But hey, 3/4 of the work has already been done for you.
I couldn't agree more. So who can give us another reason for why write historical fiction? Jillian.
I think it's because we read about these things and dates and people, but often left out of that is the emotional tie to it. So with historical fiction, we get to immerse ourselves in how it felt instead of what just happened.
Definitely. Nancy, yeah.
Teacher, and so I come at a lot of my writing and about historical fiction as a teacher because your whole idea for your company is history through fiction, which means you situate all these characters, whether they're real or not, in the historical events and help them come alive. I don't know, Alina, whether it's the easiest genre. I mean, I agree with you that you don't have to, you can make up things, but you still have to stay pretty true to the historical timeline and what the characters did and everything. So there's a restraint there for me anyway.
Well, and I'll just add for what Alina said, I don't think I ever would have written a novel if I didn't start out as a historian and kind of knew all that plot that was there already for me. Well, let's go to another question. Thank you, Brock, for that question. This question comes from Sarah, and Sarah asks, what made you want to sign with History Through Fiction? Who would like to take a shot at that question?
I'll start. I think for me, it was just the right place for the product that I had. It was History Through Fiction publishes historical fiction, literary historical fiction. We're not so dependent on a lot of other publishers. They want another little spin on it. They want YA or they want horror or they want romance, and those are all great. But when you have a manuscript that is more straight, like this is a historical retelling of something that really happened, it can be hard to find someone who is willing to take a risk on that, especially if it's lesser known or if it's not about a really famous person, such as Joan of Arc or Genghis Khan or someone like that. Although I know one of us did write about Genghis Khan. But I think that was really it. Was like it was the right place, and that's why I signed.
Thanks, Eric. Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
I think part of it for me was the huge community that History Through Fiction created, not just digitally, but when you go to a conference and you meet Colin and you see the authors on a panel, it's like people know who Colin is, but History Through Fiction has this feeling about it that everyone is included. Fans, readers, historians, writers, everyone has a place there, and I think that was really important for me to be part of.
And if there are any writers who are attending this panel, Jillian and I met at the Historical Novel Society North American Conference in San Antonio. So I know those things take time out of your schedule and they cost a lot of money to do, but you never know what kind of networks you build from doing those things. Well, before I go to our next question, I'm going to ask our first trivia question. So those of you in the audience, type your answer into the chat. The first person to answer correctly gets your name added to the prize drawing at the end. The trivia question is, which one of our titles features a fictional main character named Jan van den Bosse? And hint, the panel, this author is not on the panel tonight. Some of the questions you may have to Google. I'm totally okay with that. Jan van den Bosse.
I think I'm not a lifeline. No.
I was just going to ask, is the author, though, in the room?
The author is here, apparently. I'll give you a hint. This main character is the best friend of Andreas Vesalius, the father of human anatomy, and we have the correct answer, Sarah Murphy. Yes, that is The King's Anatomist by Ron Blumenfeld, who is here. So Sarah, I'm adding your name in addition to the question you already submitted, so thank you. Okay, let's go to another question from the audience. This one is from Mary, and Mary asks, what authors have inspired you? So which one of you would like to try that one?
Oh, I always say the same thing. There's a book I want everybody to know about in the historical fiction genre called The Man on the Donkey. And it's the best historical fiction I've ever read. It's not new anymore. It's decades old now, but it was written by a woman who spent her life as an academic steeped in the world of the Tudors. And it tells the story basically of the pilgrimage from the north, the uproar when Henry VIII banished the Pope essentially and destroyed all the monasteries. And it is an amazing book with real life characters and fictional characters. I would recommend it to anybody. The Man on a Donkey.
I don't know if Animal Farm by George Orwell would qualify. I do think it is a historical fiction. I do think it has real characters in it, just under fake names and animals. But the thing that I love about George Orwell's Animal Farm, above all of his other book, is there is not an excess word in that book. He gets his point across so perfectly in so few pages, is that I've studied it from the perspective of there is not a word, much less a sentence, you could remove from that book. It's that tight. And that's the kind of thing that I try to achieve with my writing, not so much about making a point, but to make sure that every scene has a point. So it doesn't have to be a political point or a historical point, but every scene, every sentence, every word has to have a reason for being there. And I can't think of a better example of that than Animal Farm.
I'll second that. I like it. That's a good answer.
But have we decided, does it qualify as historical fiction? Colin, you make the call.
I honestly don't think I've read it.
Well, there's your homework.
Okay.
Ed, gotta read it.
I'm going to go a little more sentimental. My dad, Grant Overstake, has been an inspiration for me. He's been a writer since I was a kid, sports columnist, newspapers. He's got 2 YA novels out. And just his absolute grit in never giving up on his craft and improving and editing without fear has been really inspirational for my own career.
I'll just add one more. Maybe we can agree this one is historical fiction. Amor Tolls. So Lincoln Highway, gentleman from Moscow, and I feel like he has a similar. Of course, his books are quite a bit longer than Animal Farm, but everything in there is important. Every sentence is important. Every scene is important, and they all make the story happen. You couldn't have the story without every single thing that's in the book. I love his writing.
Yeah, and that kind of surprised me the more I've learned about writing and about historical fiction is how valuable every line is and every word and how purposeful they are. And shout out to Grant because he is here. So I think that's wonderful what Jillian had to say. Let's go to our next question. Oh, and thank you, Mindy, for that question. And this is from PJ. Hopefully PJ made it in. I got an email as you guys were talking. I got an email from PJ that said that they didn't get the link, so I sent it. So hopefully PJ made it in. And PJ asks, what is your favorite point of view writing style?
Okay, I'm really weird. I do
Okay.
first person for one scene to get myself into the novel, and then I always flip it to third close because that's what I think most readers like to read when it's not. Well, my main character in my novel is male. So I think that I had to do that in order to really get into that character appropriately because I'm obviously not identifying as male. So for me, I had to write one scene in first and then I switched it to third. So that was my preference.
I've done that before too, and I'm so glad to hear I'm not the only one who does that because sometimes I think I prefer third. I think it works for the sort of books I write, but sometimes third can. I'm almost afraid that I'm writing like a glorified screenplay with third. So sometimes you just need that extra little oomph to get you into the character's head, and sometimes writing a scene in first and then getting that inner voice and then converting to third can be very helpful.
And Nancy, were you gonna? Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Person, because it makes me feel very close to the character. For now the book that I'm writing is I have part of it in first person with one character and in third person in the other one, and I feel very distant from the other character in third person, and I feel very uncomfortable with it. And I guess like you, Eric, it kind of feels like it's it's I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me, but I'm doing it. I'm, pushing myself.
Well, my first three novels I all wrote in first person, and I think that's what a lot of authors do just to kind of get their feet wet. It seems there's a less nuance to it maybe. But now I prefer to write in limited third. I'm going to go to our next trivia question. So the trivia question is, which one of our authors was born in Odessa, USSR? Which one of our authors was born in Odessa, USSR? So a little hint there. And they are on the panel. Oh, we got Catherine with Alina Adams question mark, and she is correct. So thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm afraid I gave that away as a spoiler. I realized as I started answering your question that I jumped the gun.
No worries. Catherine. All right. Let's go on to, well, actually, I've got so many trivia questions. Let me ask another one. The question is, which author wrote a novel featuring an animal as one of their main characters? Okay, Sarah. Sarah did not hesitate to answer that one. And Sarah is right. And I'm guessing she knows, Jillian, because the novel is not out yet. So congratulations, Sarah. And Let's go with one more here. This one might be a little bit more challenging because we haven't put out a whole lot of information about it. What is the title of our forthcoming novel that will be published on May 7th, 2024? So I've already said Eric's will be published on February 20th. We have another one coming out May 7th. Does anyone know what the title is? I'll give you a hint. It is about Mary and Percy Shelley. And it is written by author Ezra Harker Shaw, who is not on the panel tonight. Sarah Murphy, The Osceola's Cry. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, let's go to our next question from the audience. This question is from Renee. Renee asks for Alina, who is your favorite author and why? And you kind of covered that. Do you have anything more to say?
Well, here's the thing. The academic and quasi-pretentious answer is I love George Orwell. John Steinbeck is probably my favorite author in the literary genre, more like several of his books. I happen to love Animal Farm Beyond All Reason, but I love more of John Steinbeck's book. But the other answer, which is the teenage me and the historical fiction reading me, is my favorite author growing up was Sidney Sheldon, because talk about stories that move. And that's another thing. I tried to emulate George Orwell and never having an excess word or an excess scene. But I also tried to emulate Sidney Sheldon in that the story is always moving forward. And I think, Colin, you might have seen in some of the reviews that I got for My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region, as some people pointed out, it just keeps moving. It just keeps going so quickly. So that wasn't an accident. That was actually something that I really tried to do. I'm terrified of boring people. And I always say that my goal is to write airplane books. And that means that if you're stuck on an airplane for 10 hours, if reading my book makes it feel like it was 6 hours, then I've achieved my goal.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, Colin, you muted.
You're muted. Yeah, there
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have a favorite author? We talked about authors that inspired you. Does anyone else want to tell us who your favorite author is? That's okay. I can move on to our next question. Okay, this is also from Sarah. We got a lot of Sarahs, so I don't know which one this is. And Sarah asks, apparently the most recent historical fiction book I read took the author 4 years and 17 drafts. I'm curious, how long did your projects usually take you, and if those timelines / draft counts have changed at all as you have written more books? I'll start. My novels have actually taken longer. So the most recent novel I wrote, Reclaiming Minnesota, took the longest and had the most drafts. And I think that's because I learned just how intricate writing a novel can be. I mean, you're writing 80, 100,000 words, and a lot can go wrong if you're not very careful and really go in depth on every detail and every sentence and just making sure that it's checked over and over again. And so I just did so many revisions and had so many people help me with it, so many, from beta reading to developmental editing to structural editing to sensitivity reading, all that kind of stuff. So my process has gotten longer the more that I've written.
My novel, South of Sephiroth, actually I wrote it quicker than I expected. It took me about 3 years of really writing it before I started sending out for publication. I want to say I did maybe 5 drafts, but I think there's an asterisk next to that, which is that I wrote most of it during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also I was in LA and we had a lockdown that lasted a long time, longer than most of the country. So even though I was still working, there wasn't a whole lot to do. I couldn't really see people. So it was I came home and I worked on the book. So I don't know if I could write something that fast again, but I was able to do it much faster than I had anticipated.
I think I'm an anomaly. My novel took me about 8 months to write, about 3 months to research, and then my second one, which just went to an editor on Monday, took me about the same. But I think I'm still in grad school land where they give you a deadline and you have a semester. And I'm also a huge NaNoWriMo writer. So I try to get that 50,000 words every November and every April and every July. And those really motivate me to write as many words as possible. But I always have a very clear guide of where I'm going. So my planning and research process is there before I attempt to write 50,000 words of something.
Is there more than one NaNoWriMo?
Yeah,
What
there's
is that?
NaNoWriMo camp.
Yeah, they have like summer camp in July. I didn't know about the April one though. What's in April? Is
Yeah,
that
it's
like
like
camp?
a mini camp, same thing. So you get like a little tent icon
Okay.
and you can make up your own word count. So you won't get like prizes and things for hitting 50,000. But if that's your goal, cool, go for it.
What is a nano, whatever it is?
Oh, it's National Novel Writing Month. It's basically a worldwide organization that inspires people to write 50,000 words in the month of November every year. It's pretty cool. I can send you a link.
Gosh, I could never do that. My first novel took me about 5 years, I'd say. And I can't really say how many drafts because I'm constantly revising as I go along. So like before I start on the next scene, I'm going to go back and look at 2 or 3 scenes before that and start working them over to get into what's going to happen next. So I mean, that's what some, in one way, I have to say computers are an absolute blessing because you can just do that endlessly and you don't have to retype it every time.
Yeah, it's amazing. Rewriting one scene can throw off so many other scenes, and then you have to go back and you have to kind of decide, do I want to go back or do I want to keep moving forward and just go back to it later? But yeah, the revision process can be challenging because of that. Well, let's go to our next question from the audience. Oh, this is a long one. It comes from Harold. Like I said, I didn't read these beforehand, so I don't know if I can summarize it. I'll just have to go through it. My current project is a multi-generational Jewish family saga. It begins in 1881 when the first and second generation escape death during a Russian pogrom in the Jewish village and settle on New York's Lower East Side. It ends in 1946 when the fourth generation son and daughter return home after serving in World War II. Throughout the book, the family members participate in historical events, such as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and the sinking of the Lusitania, and interact with historical figures such as Fiorello LaGuardia and Charles Lindbergh. Has anyone else written a similar novel? So it sounds like it's quite an epic novel, covers a lot of time, and these characters kind of experience a lot of different historical events. Can anyone relate to that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think one of the fun things is having fictional characters interact with people who were real people and, offer some sort of perspective or insight into what those folks might have been like. I had a lot of fun with that with A Noble Cunning. And right now I'm working on something that takes place in the late 12th century. And one of my characters is Richard the Lionhearted. So, I mean, this is just great fun. Because you can present your own idea that you come to after research of what this person was like, and then choose how you want to have fictional characters react with that person.
Well, as I outed myself as having been born in Ukraine, which is a hotbed of pogroms then and now, at pretty much any time, that's definitely an area in which I work in a little bit later because I focus mostly on the Soviet times because I find a lot of fiction because so many Americans, their grandparents came over usually in 1905 mostly because of the Kishinev pogrom, but also some of the other small ones. But that's definitely an area in which both of my historical fiction novels are set, because having come from the Soviet Union, my parents were born in the Soviet Union, my grandparents were born in the Soviet Union, the old Pale of Settlement, which is where most of the Jewish immigrants came from, that's definitely an area in which I specialize.
Thank you. And I see Jillian also added Ken Follett does a similar thing too with multi-generational sweeping sagas.
And Renee mentioned James Michener. His books are phenomenal. I was just telling my son about his book, Hawaii. You wouldn't think that 1,000-page novel would be so compelling that it has you turning pages. But even his prologue, where he talks about how the island of Hawaii started because birds would fly overhead and they would excrete seeds and volcanic lava, how it formed the island. And he does it in such a way that's like, this is the most exciting thing that has ever happened. The book is 1,000 pages long and it just never lets up. Also, his book, The Source, equally great. I mean, how he does it, I don't know. So many pages.
Can I mention another favorite along those lines? Has
Sure.
anybody, it's a little bit forgotten now, but one of my all-time favorites is Herman Wouk, who wrote The Winds of War and War and Remembrance, about World War II, the lead up to World War II and then World War II. And he has this character, Pug Henry, who's an American officer, travel around the world on various missions and meet, the heads of the Soviet Union, Churchill, Roosevelt, everybody. I mean, it almost becomes funny at one point that
Well, and that's actually an issue
to run into so many famous people, but
if
they're incredible books.
If you've ever read the novel Holocaust, it's Your Word is Patricia, it becomes funny. Because in order to have the characters be at everything, they want them to be both at Kristallnacht in Germany and at the prison revolt in Sobibor and at Babi Yar. And it actually becomes funny.
And at Hiroshima.
Yeah, exactly. They have to rush them from point A to point B. It's like they have a chart. It's like it's a scavenger hunt. It's like, oh, have to rush over to Babi Yar now. Oh, they need me over in Sobibor. I am so glad that you brought that up, Patricia, because while it's impeccably researched, I can't say he was wrong. It becomes funny at a certain point because you can almost predict, oh, where will he pop up next?
Robin, do you want to mention, you brought up in the chat there, Marjorie Morningstar?
That's also a Herman Wouk book. It's one that I liked a lot as a young reader. It's a little bit different. It's not about World War II or anything. It's more about a girl and her dreams and how things change as you get older. But it is a very good book, and it would be historical now. So because I think it's 50s. I think it's set the 50s, if I'm not wrong.
No, it's depressing. The 1980s are historical now.
Yeah.
If the definition of historical fiction is it happened 50 years before publication, the 1980s are now historical.
Yeah, I try not to make me depressed now. Okay. But yes.
People are going to be writing historical novels about disco.
They already are.
They are. There's
already are.
Disco that are period pieces. No, well, there's movies about the 80s that are period pieces. Think of Tales from the City or Pulse, or those TV shows that take place in the 70s and 80s. They're historical now.
Mm-hmm. True.
I'm going to go back to some trivia questions. So remember, be the first person to answer this correctly via the chat, and your name gets added to our prize drawing at the end. This one should be relatively easy. What year was History Through Fiction founded? It was prior to the pandemic, but we're not that old. Kayla, 2019, yes. Thank you, Kayla. Next question. Which one of our novels features a Jewish physician, it's hard to say, a Jewish physician named Vidal? Oh, that was quick. Cody. Thank you, Cody. You are correct. It is South of Sepharad by Eric Weintraub. And one more trivia question. What is Robin Henry's title with History Through Fiction? It is on the website if you don't know. What is Robin Henry's title with History Through Fiction? Oh, not a book coach. Although I did hire her to help me with my novel. That was in a different capacity. I'll give you a hint. It deals with our short stories because we publish short stories in our member area. Yeah, we'll go with that, Sarah. She is our short story acquisition editor. So if you want to get your story, a short story published by History Through Fiction, Robin has to like it first.
Okay, and I'll give you some insider info right now. I have World War II fatigue. So it's not to say that I wouldn't love it. It's going to have to be super great. Super great.
Okay, let's keep things rolling here with some more questions from our audience. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Hopefully I made it clear enough where you could. But we got plenty of questions. I don't think I'll ever run out. So that's good. This is from Demetra. Demetra asks, what made each of you decide to write historical fiction? What was your inspiration for writing historical fiction? This is a question I often ask on the podcast because, I talk with these great authors that are doing so much research. You could very easily write a nonfiction book about the subjects you are conveying, but why write it as fiction instead of using that research to write nonfiction?
Because you get to make it better. You can improve on history. History did okay, but we can do it better.
You can give it a better ending, right? Sometimes.
I want to riff on something Jillian said a little earlier about the idea that historical fiction, it's a way to put a human element into it, that factor. And I think that for me is making it the history books can be great, but I want to know who the people are. I want to see the story firsthand, not just be reading about facts and figures in a book. So really, it's about for me, historical fiction. It's really the entertainment aspect of it is wanting to see how this plays out as a narrative and not just a timeline on a page in a history book.
I think part of it for me was that my main character didn't leave any primary sources. And I wanted to know what happened. And I knew that because there wasn't a captain's log or a journal, I would never actually know the answer. And that was so depressing. So instead of just saying, well, that's it, you don't know, I decided that I was going to use not only my historian training, but my imagination and my real want to know what he actually experienced to put pen to paper and make it come alive.
Nancy, did you want to add?
I think that one of the fascinating things for me about reading history and getting into these characters is to understand what their motivations were. History doesn't always provide that, and I think when you have characters interact, you understand why that carries the story forward. That's what actually is revealed is their motivation. So I think that's one of the things I always look for and try to build on.
Yeah, it definitely humanizes people and makes them much more relatable. Thank you for that question, Demetra, I think it was. Let's go to our next question. This is from Sarah Murphy. What do the gaps in historical record allow you to do as a fiction author? So similar vein. So what are some of the advantages then of being a fiction author and being able to, now, obviously like Nancy was just talking about, you kind of get to know them and their motivations a little bit, but you do have to fill in some gaps. So can you talk about filling in those gaps?
Well, it has to be true to the characters and to history. So, I mean, you can make up anything. But if it doesn't ring true to the reader, then, as with many historical fiction readers who I think are a breed apart because they really like to learn, they're going to be a little turned off by that.
I think you can also look at side notes. So if you know that someone was in one place and you know what year it was, you can look maybe in places you wouldn't expect, like what was going on at the opera then, or what artists were exhibiting in Paris during the month
Yeah.
that they were there. And those little things, even if you know that person may not have actually seen that, you can lead them into those places. And that becomes a creative process that also sticks to history, but can give you a little more expansiveness if you need it.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next question. It's another question from Brock, and Brock asks, what is a relationship between truth and historical fiction?
What is the relationship between truth and history? It's you get into who gets to write the historical record before you even get into fiction. It's you can first ask yourself that question: how much of the history that we know is history is fiction? I was just talking to one of my sons today about the Odyssey. Does the Odyssey tell us about the time when the story is set, or does it tell us about the time when the story was recited, or does it tell us about the story when it was written down?
Alina, I feel like that's really true for Eric's book.
It's such a good question. I'm trying to put a little more into it in terms of, I think it's really a way to take what's missing and give it. I feel like I'm being too abstract. You can come back to me. I feel like I'm being too abstract.
Well, Jillian, maybe you can add to this, because you and I are kind of dealing with this with your novel and shrinking the timeline. Now, we know that's not how things happen historically. Why did you do that? And is it okay to stretch the truth that way?
Well, the answer is yes, because it's not a history book. My main character and my animal main character spent a long 18 years together. But if I wrote an 18-year relationship day by day, that would be another 1,000-page novel that no one would want to read. So you do have to keep the reader's attention, and there's so much gap in the record there for me that it's really difficult. But I think part of that is I want you to know the overarching story of what the beginning and the end were instead of the muddy middle. But I think, just like Alina was saying, that's often what historians did when they're writing primary sources. Or my main character didn't leave much behind. Maybe that's because he wasn't a noble person or he wasn't royalty. He was a common guy. And those stories, I find those little tiny snippets, just one sentence about, for me, a rhino visiting a farm in the middle of Germany in 1750. That's one sentence. What kind of things happened that didn't have any sentences left behind for anything that we'll never know about? Or how much of those sentences that we read were completely made up or exaggerated, or we have this salacious media thing going on? Or like in Eric's novel, the people who are being asked to leave can't speak truth because their lives are at risk. So I think that that's a really difficult question. But I think the answer is we do the best we can to make sure that things aren't forgotten.
I think maybe we need to be, Hilary Mantel kind of reminds us of how we need to be a little more humble about what we're doing, because when you talk about truth versus versus fiction, she said, history's not the past. It's the method we have evolved of organizing our ignorance of the past. It's the record of what's left on the record. And she says it's no more the past than a birth certificate is a birth, or a script is a performance, or a map is a journey. It's the multiplication of the evidence of fallible and biased witnesses combined with incomplete accounts of actions not fully understood by the people who performed them. It's no more than the best we can do, and often it falls short of that. And she did such thorough research before she wrote the Wolf Hall books that she knew what Cromwell was doing every day of the week, every week of the year, every year of his life. And for her to feel that her best was still not quite going to get at it was amazing to me.
My question is, what do you do when sources conflict?
Well, I would say you have to find multiple sources, and somewhere you're going to find agreement between sources, and you have to also have to go with contextual sources. What kind of historical context can you put together so that you can make a reasonable conclusion? And then finally, what serves the story? And I think that's hard for me coming at this as a historian, but ultimately I think that's what you have to choose, is what's going to serve the story.
Well, you're also depending on people's memories. I'll give you an example. The book that we published together, My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region, I used primary sources, historical sources, a book that was written after the fact. And my father read it and he said, that's not how it happened. He said, that's not how I remember. He spoke about a particular incident. Now, my father just turned 83. Happy birthday to my father. Is his memory infallible? What about the memory of the people that told the story that ended up in the book? We'll never know.
Well, we're having a really good conversation. I'm really enjoying it. We are getting close to an hour here, so I'm going to ask a few more trivia questions. I'm going to jump back in, do a couple more questions from our audience, and then I'll end with a few trivia questions, and then I'll go to the drawing, because I know some people are looking forward to that drawing. So we'll go through a few more questions. I'll get to that drawing, and then we'll wrap it up. So the next trivia question, and this one could be kind of a shot in the dark. It involves one of our panelists. So if you don't know, just start writing the names of the panelists. Which one of our panelists has a Master's of Library Science? It is, I don't know, it is not Eric. Robin, yes. Thank you, Catherine. Okay. Next question also involves one of our panelists. Who was the first author to sign a publishing contract with History Through Fiction? Nancy, Renee, very quick with that one. Thank you. It was a gamble, Nancy, but so glad you did that.
Well, for both of us, Colin, so I couldn't have made a better decision.
Okay, one more question. In our novel, in my novel, Reclaiming Minnesota, which two native tribes become unlikely allies? So these two native tribes are traditionally from the Minnesota region. They're traditional enemies, but in the novel, they become allies. Guess we'll find out if anyone read my book. Be easier for someone from Minnesota. One of these tribes is native to Minnesota. Yes, the Ojibwe and the Dakota. Renee, you got another one. Okay, so I'll ask just a couple more questions from our audience. Like I said, I'll never run out of questions. This is from PJ. The question is, did you find the need to use endnotes or footnotes to reference historical events?
I know I did. So footnotes, not so much, but I really felt that there were, because I was pulling from so many different sources, and there were some, not everyone's going to be familiar with all of them. Some be familiar with some sources, some others. I felt that it was really important just for people, readers, to know where these sources came from. Because to not do that, sometimes it's so weird. They say truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes something will sound like it's made up, or someone will say that can't be right. But then, you point to the source and it is right. So I felt that for me, endnotes were very important so that people can know that I wasn't making it up, that this does come from research and is backed up by other sources.
Yeah, and I'll say my novel, Resisting Removal, which was actually the first title that I published with History Through Fiction, It's based, the research I did is based on a Supreme Court case between the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe and the United States government in 1999. And so the research I did was extremely extensive because the research for this case was extensive. And when fictionalizing the novel, I had to take some of that research and change it into these fictional scenes, fictional conversations, a lot of correspondence that happened. I changed into conversations, and I felt like I had an obligation to include at the end of the book these chapter notes. That I'd say, well, these two people didn't actually meet and talk, but here's what they did do. They wrote a letter on July 27th, 1851, and whatnot. So I just really wanted to be transparent with my readers, and that's kind of what History Through Fiction is founded on, is providing that transparency for readers.
Well, you also have, in my book, I assume the others did this as well, that you ask us to write a sort of annotated bibliography of the characters and the books and things that we consulted, so that they can consult them as well, or to verify, that we, did things honestly. So I thought that was really good. I mean, it would really kept me honest, and it's very useful for the reader too.
Yes,
I
Colin,
think so,
toot
too.
your own horn. That's what's unique about History Through Fiction. You should be able to answer that. No, it's not if, it's definitely, it's what you decided to do. That's what makes History Through Fiction, History Through Fiction.
Well, I guess if I go back a little bit further, my first three novels all have some nonfiction element like footnotes or endnotes. And I was always getting this feedback that said fiction can't have footnotes, fiction can't have these disruptions. And I agree that there needs to be there's a delicate balance there, because you don't want to disrupt the reader from their fictional dream or from being engaged in the story. But I also think that there's a lot of value in providing the reader this sense of transparency, where the sources come from, what's fact, what's fiction. When I read historical fiction, I'm just so curious every time I'm reading something to know, was this true? Did this happen this way? Jillian, if I were to read your book for the first time, I would go nuts trying to figure out, and I did when I was reading your manuscript. So that's one thing that I founded History Through Fiction on, was this idea that you can provide a certain level of transparency without disrupting the fictional dream. And Nancy, not every novel is the same. Alina's novel, for instance, I mean, she comes from this soap opera background. It's a mother-daughter relationship. So we didn't include many of those elements, but it'll be a little bit different with each novel that we publish. Well, let's go to the next question. Looks like Robin had a prior engagement, so she dropped off. I'll ask one more question before going to a couple final trivia questions, and then we'll do our drawing. This question is also from PJ. What do you suggest as a substitute? What do you suggest as a substitute for historical footnotes?
An author's note that's really well written. And I've been thinking about having like a QR code on mine, and we haven't talked about this, Colin, but a lot of my primary sources are art, which is weird, but think about it this way. I have a place, I have a name, I have an exact year in most circumstances, and museums keep really good records of where their art came from. And that's where I was able to find a lot of my primary sources, because my main character left no journal. So if there's a QR code in a book that says, for more information, scan here, and it takes you directly to a site where you're like, oh, this is exactly the scene that I read, and here it is in a painting, or if it's new enough, a photograph. Those are also great things that you can use for footnotes and endnotes that really speak to a reader, because they can see it. And that will also help them develop a sense of place, time, people, all of those things. So if you don't have those, I think something on a website, a blog post, or a really detailed author's note would also be great.
Yeah, and with ebooks, you can provide links within the book if you really wanted to do that, go through the extra effort. Eric was already saying that we have an additional historical research that's not available in the novel, but it is available on the website. And I see that with a lot of the authors that I bring on the podcast, is when I'm doing my research for the interview, you go to their website and they have all this additional historical references. So that's an option there too.
I think only one person mentioned the bibliography though, but whereas footnotes can get pretty wearisome in a real carefully researched historical book, nonfiction, I've always had a lot of fun with author's notes and bibliographies, and to get to do both for a novel was really exciting. I think if if it doesn't spoil the story, you read through the novel and then you get more of the historical explanation, that's perfect. It draws you even further into the time period and the life of the people.
I also feel like I don't do footnotes, but I've definitely read books where footnotes are used creatively. To that, the one that actually comes to mind, I know he got in a little hot water a couple years ago, but Junot Diaz wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book called The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And as you're reading that book, a lot of it's about the history of the Dominican Republic. But it's filled with footnotes, but those footnotes are not just like see a reference to encyclopedia. They are almost an entire other novel and voice in themselves. So if you want to read a book that really takes the footnotes and does something very creative and unique with it that I haven't seen too many other people do, I recommend that one.
It's a great book, Eric.
Kate Atkinson has in one of her titles, the one that has hotel in it. I don't remember the title right now, but Kate Atkinson does something very similar. The footnotes almost create a story of their own.
Well, and so when I got my master's in history, that's what I really enjoyed reading were books that were the top half was the narrative, the history, the bottom half was all the footnotes, and there's just so much interesting information, and you can go on a whole another journey just going through those footnotes. Well, I'm going to ask just a couple more trivia questions. So this is your last chance to get an additional entry to the drawing, or if you didn't submit a question beforehand, this is your only chance to get added to the drawing that we'll be doing in just a moment. So our next trivia question is, what is the title of our novel featuring the Mongol Empire? This author is not on the panel tonight, but it is a novel published by History Through Fiction in, I think it was 2021, March of 2021. The cover has a desert and some camels on it. Genghis Khan's Legacy would be a great title. Not correct. Yes, Sarah Murphy, The Sky Worshippers. Sorry, Sarah Murphy topped Sarah and Kayla. Okay, next trivia question. Which one of our authors resides in Los Angeles? Renee has got her hands on that keyboard. Good job, Renee. Yes, it is Eric.
I gave that one away in the chat earlier. Sorry.
Okay, last trivia question. And this one's, you got to go a little bit deeper for this one. What is the name of the main character in Patricia Bernstein's novel, A Noble Cunning? And Patricia, maybe you can tell us the name of the person this character was based off of.
Winifred Herbert. Oh my goodness, what was his last name?
Maxwell.
Yeah. Countess of Nithsdale.
Looks like Laura is correct, though. And what is the name of the main character?
I missed it. What did she say?
Beth Ann. Or you always say it differently than me.
Bethan.
Bethan Glenn Taggart.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay. So that will be the end of our questions and our trivia. I'm going to put all of the questions back in the bag along with the correct answers to the trivia questions. I will say to win, you must be present. So I may grab a few And we have 3 prizes. The prizes are, one is a virtual lunch with one of our authors, and that includes a $25 DoorDash gift card, which for some reason I already bought, so I have a physical card. So I'll have to send it to you in the mail. Digital would have been easier. And then we'll work out the details as far as which author is available and when. That is one of the prizes. Another prize is a gift box of History Through Fiction books. And so you can select any 3 of our titles, and I will send those to you. And the third prize is a History Through Fiction tote bag, and that's printed through Printful. So I don't have any of those on hand. It'll come from Printful, but those are very nice bags. It's like a $25 value. And whoever wins first, you can pick between those 3 prizes. It'll be your choice. Does anyone want to provide a drum roll? Okay, like I said, we may have to go through a few times. Our winner is Kathy Scott Mejia. Kathy, are you here?
Yay.
Okay, yay, Kathy is here. Okay, Kathy, which prize would you like?
Hmm.
A box of books. Okay.
Good choice, Kathy.
So, Catherine, I will connect with you later. Probably tomorrow. I'll send you an email, and then I'll get your address and get which books that you want, and we'll get those sent to you. I'm just writing this down too. So. I'll take this opportunity to say that if you want books by History Through Fiction, they are available for sale in our online store. They're also available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, bookshop.org. If you don't have a budget for buying books, go to your library, see if they've got them. If they don't, say, hey, you need to get these books because I would like to read them. And that just helps us a lot to support us as a small press and as independent authors. You can also leave reviews for our books, as long as they're positive. Maybe some of the negative ones help too, because then it helps readers discover what's for them and what's not. But those reviews go a long way in helping other readers discover our books. Okay, our next winner. So your 2 prize options now are the virtual lunch or the tote bag. And the name that I have pulled is Ginny. Ginny. Is Ginny here? I'm doing a search of the participants. It does not look like Ginny's here. We'll give just a few seconds here to see if Ginny can respond. Okay. So I'll pull another name. I know this person is here or was here, Renee. Renee, congratulations. Just respond in the chat if you are still here.
Renee is here and didn't.
Okay. Renee, which prize would you like between the virtual lunch and the History Through Fiction tote bag? Okay. So I will connect with you via email and get that sent out to you, and then we'll arrange that virtual lunch. Any thoughts on which author you want to have lunch with? Well, you give that some thought. Okay, last prize. Ooh, Alina. Hopefully we can make that work with Alina. Okay, the last prize is a History Through Fiction tote bag. Others are okay. The others would be fantastic. Just not as fantastic as Alina. Okay, did I already? I got Kathy again. So let's go to the next one. Kathy, you can't win twice. I'm sorry. Okay, Kayla. Excuse me, Kayla. I think I saw Kayla here earlier. Kayla, are you still here? I see Jillian. Okay, Kayla Jordan. So I will send you a history fiction tote bag. I'll connect with you later in order to get your mailing address. Okay, well, this has been a really fun event. I guess I'll let each one of the panelists just say thank you and goodbye. Jillian, what would you like to say?
Thank you so much. This was my first author event, and I'm just really excited to be part of this team.
Eric, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. We had a really big turnout. I'm really happy about it. I hope you guys enjoyed the panel, and thank you so much for taking time out of your night to come and talk to us and have this night with us.
Nancy.
Thank you. Yes, writing is such a solitary thing. It always amazes me that there are people out there reading and we're so knowledgeable. So great to see you all.
And Alina, I know you have something to say.
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming, because I know as someone who actually works a day job where I have to look at screens a lot, I know that you actually have to make an effort to come and look at another screen. And so I'm very, very grateful that you did it. And there was a line that I heard from an Emma Thompson movie where she says, "I hope I've earned the privilege of your time."
And Patricia.
This has been a lot of fun, and I'm impressed with the level of knowledge of all the people who participated tonight. Wow.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun. It was great conversation. Yeah, a ton of insight that hopefully people can use for their own writing and maybe reading, just appreciate more kind of the craft that goes into this. So I want to thank everyone for supporting History Through Fiction, for being a part of the events that we host, for reading our books, for talking about our books on social media and sharing them with others. We're going to continue to grow, and we're going to continue to publish these really amazing stories, and I hope all of you continue to be a part of it. So thanks everyone, panelists, attendees. I really appreciate all of you being part of this event. It was a lot of fun, and we're definitely going to do it again before too long.
Thank you, Colin, for setting it up.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.